Day here, and I've been an artist for about 10 years now, give or take a few years. But there are definitely things I wish I knew back then to make those 10 years a lot easier on myself. So here are 5 things I wish I could tell my beginner artist self. First off, Day, please use your references. Yes, I was quite a prideful artist back then. I didn't want anyone's design, pose, ideas to touch any of my art because I wanted to be completely original. But in reality, that only caused my art to suffer because pulling everything out of my small little noggin that hasn't even lived half my life yet, you can tell how little of a visual library I had. Now you might be asking, visual library? What in the world is that? Well, metaphorically speaking, it's sort of like a library in your brain where you store any visual information that you've ever seen in your life. It just so happens that our brains are not supercomputers and we can't necessarily memorize what everything looks like. And that is the reason why I like to emphasize on the importance of using references. When you use reference, you're essentially expanding your visual library. And the more you draw from reference, the more accurate your drawings will be. Perhaps later on you've mastered to draw a certain thing. You can move off of reference from that. But as a beginner, it's so important to solidify that visual library and keep expanding it for better imagination drawing later on. Now, a few people have told me that they have become over-dependent on references and they have a hard time shifting their overly referenced drawings into more imaginative drawings. Now, I could make a more extended video about this later on. Let me know if you would like me to. But just a quick spiel about it, what helps me is collecting multiple images to merge into an illustration rather than depending on like 1 or 2 references. An app that helps me out doing this exercise is Pinterest. So I go on Pinterest, I pin at least like 10 different drawings that I can merge into one illustration. And so then instead of being an overly heavily referenced image, I can mix the two of imagination and referencing, and that will help build up practice over time. Next thing I want to tell my younger self is that style is not everything. When I grew up, I started posting on Instagram, and on Instagram, what really worked well was having a very consistent style. You kind of build your identity based on this style, and I also liked artists that had consistent styles, and I followed them as well. And I did fall into that trap. I did have a consistent art style, and I liked it. It was cute, and it was satisfying at the time that I made it. But 10 years down the line, you change as an artist. I have different preferences now, but my art is still the same. And I didn't realize why I disliked my art so much until I looked at it and I was like, perhaps it is the style. So I began drawing fan arts of other people's style, exactly their style, and like not even drawing from my own imagination. And I didn't even realize just how many eye shapes that you could draw. I didn't even realize just how many ways you can shade skin in. I was so stuck in this small bubble and it basically cut off my potential. And now I'm faced with a problem of an inconsistent art style. But honestly, I'd rather take the inconsistent art style over the same art style for the past 10 years. And fortunately, I can still use the art styles that I've gathered these past year. And now I call getting a new art style getting a new tool. Don't get down on yourself if you have an inconsistent art style. Just take it as getting a new tool. You're adding more tools to your toolbox, and that can only mean good things. And the next thing I want to tell myself is take notes much earlier and much more than you have before. When I began learning art, I did take notes, and I can look back on them now and understand what my thought processes are. But let's just say out of like 30 days in a month, one of those days is the notes that I took. And then 29 of those days would just be me like messing around with my sketchbook. Now, as a much more mature artist, I actually take notes on all my sketchbooks. whenever I can. Even if it's just a small thought of like, ooh, I like this eye, or his hair looks kind of like skewed. I wonder why that is. It's great because now I can look back at my sketchbooks now and reflect on my drawings. Reflection is actually such an underrated practice, not just in drawing, but since we're an art channel, we're gonna keep this to drawing. But reflect on your art pieces and be your own art critic. Not art critic in a way you're downgrading yourself, but art critic in a way how you can judge your art objectively. And then later on, look back onto it and see if you can redraw some of your old art based on the critique that you gave yourself. It's a great practice, and over time, you're really going to see the improvements that you wanted from yourself from the past. And you'll never know that if you don't take notes. Now, the next thing I want to tell my younger self is to find a workflow. Workflow is exactly how it sounds like, which is the flow of how you want to work. Or the way I like to see it is creating a system. For me, I have a tendency to go all over the place when I draw. I sometimes draw out the eye, then I start inking the hand, then I start coloring the eye, and then I'll start inking the hair, and then I'll start coloring the clothes, and then start coloring the hair later on. I don't know why I work this way. It was just a way to like itch my brain and was like, yeah, do things, do that now, do this now. I never really thought too deeply into it, but if I can just like tap myself on the shoulder, the person who was drawing like this, and tell them, hey, slow down and just do it step by step, like keep it simple and keep it consistent every time. Now that I have a consistent workflow with digital, it doesn't pain me to draw digital as much as before, and I don't get distracted as much. And I probably have cut in half the time that I would have worked on pieces from back then and now. And I'm grateful for that. So just a simple thing, create a system for yourself and experiment with it and find what works best for you and make it purposeful. Yeah, that's it for workflow. This is embarrassing to admit. And this last advice I want to tell my younger self is more of a personal one. So don't take this advice too seriously. It's really just specifically for my younger ears to hear. And that is, don't give up on your alcohol markers. When I was young, one of my biggest birthday gifts was getting alcohol markers, and I was so ecstatic because everyone glorified alcohol markers. I remember like the era of perhaps like 2013, maybe it might be earlier or forward. Alcohol markers were everything. Like digital art was not even like the main thing that we saw on social media. It was alcohol markers. Every like art tuber had alcohol markers. Instagram was full of like alcohol marker artists. And for my naive self, I thought that if I had these markers, my drawings would be magical and like my mind would be blown. I know. And then when I actually got them and used them on like just notebook paper, I was so disappointed. I was like, these do not feel magical. They're bleeding everywhere and they smell really bad. So, I use them sparingly, kind of more like a base for my other art mediums because they created a solid base for me, but never anything more. But now that I'm a fully grown adult with adult money, I was able to experiment a lot more with alcohol markers, and I digress. They're actually so fun. They're my favorite medium now, and I guess what broke me out of that bubble of alcohol markers is not glorifying it. So now I view our alcohol markers as just a tool to get colors down on a page, and it just so happens that these colors act differently on different paper, which I did not know back then. Now I do. And I just observed how they acted on the page, how like this shade of red reacts with this shade of yellow and how they blend and mix together. And after experimenting with like no glorification behind the tool, I was able to enjoy the actual tool. So don't glorify your tools and just have fun with them and be free with your art supplies. And yeah, I think that was 5 points in total. I totally lost count, but hopefully that was 5. These are definitely things I want to like time travel back to and tell my younger artist self. But more importantly, over everything, I want to tell my younger self that, hey, one day you'll be able to draw pretty boys, so you better not give up. Okay? Well, this has been Day. Signing out. Keep on dreaming, peeps. Bye.
でもそんなんじゃダメもうそんなんじゃほら心は進化するよもっともっと